Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome everybody again to another episode of our show, bringing you another really fascinating guest today involved in creating a better tomorrow. Today we have the honor of being joined by Dr. Nadine Lamberski, who is Chief Conservation and Wildlife Health Officer at the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance. Dr. Lamberski leads a unified team of conservation scientists, researchers, wildlife nutritionists, and veterinarians, ultimately cultivating a strategic approach to conservation efforts. And she aligns the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance with other global conservation organizations, developing strategies that ultimately safeguard biodiversity so that all life can thrive on the planet. Dr. Lamberski joined the San Diego Zoo Safari Park back in 2001 as a senior veterinarian, following 7 years as a senior veterinarian at the Riverbanks Zoological Park and Botanical Garden in Columbia, South Carolina. She completed an internship at University of Tennessee and Zoo Knoxville, followed by a zoological medicine residency at the University of California, Davis, and has focused her career on the health and welfare of zoological species, as well as on the conservation impacts of disease on small or fragmented wildlife populations. She has participated in numerous field projects, including studying black-footed cats in southern Africa, thick-billed parrots in northern Mexico, desert tortoises in southwestern United States, along with many others. Dr. Lamberski is a diplomat of the American College of Zoological Medicine, as well as the European College of Zoological Medicine and Zoo Health Management, received her undergraduate degree in zoology and her doctor in veterinary medicine from the University of Georgia, is a member of numerous organizations, as well as serving as past president of the American Association of Zoo Veterinarians. And she also is an adjunct professor at the University of California, Davis One Health Institute and Wildlife Health Center, numerous scientific publications and presentations over the years. We're honored to have with us today, though. A lot to talk about. Dr. Nadine Lamberski, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show.
Well, thank you for having me, Ara. It's going to be quite a pleasure.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I'd love to start off, as we typically do, Nadine, by handing you the floor for a little bit, just to talk a little bit more about you and your background. If you could sort of take us back to the early days, things like where you grew up, when you first got interested in zoology and veterinary medicine, and a little bit of those early days. I think that'd be a great way to start off the story.
Sure. Well, we are going a long way back in time. I grew up as a child in New Jersey, and I spent a lot of my time, I was quite shy, introverted. I think that sticks to this day. I spent a lot of my time in the woods behind our house, and I felt really, even as a young child, very much at home in the woods, especially by myself. But I never felt truly alone. I was always fascinated by nature and looking, digging deep to see what was under rocks, what was in streams, what was, where was all that magic hidden that you only saw if you looked really close. So I had a very, very strong attachment to nature, as far back as I can remember. And I also had a very strong attachment to animals. And I think that in part that's from being quite a bit shy and introverted. I was very attached to the pets we had at home. And I was also very sympathetic towards any injured animal, any bird my cat would bring home, and any rabbit hit by car or squirrel I would try to bring home and take care of. I'm sure my success rate was pretty poor at the time. Hopefully that improved over the years. But I really was drawn, I think, to veterinary medicine out of that love of nature and animals and helping and caring. And then I was fortunate to have been a good student. I love school, and I did well in school, and I think that helped me to get into veterinary school. It can be quite competitive, and I really threw everything I had into veterinary school. And one thing when I was growing up that if I was to allow myself to think beyond being a veterinarian, because I did feel like I wanted to be a veterinarian from a really early age, I also had this crazy idea that one day I would save endangered species. Mm-hmm. And that's like child talk, right? That's not what that's not really a job you can apply for today. Mm-hmm. And so as I became more practical, went to veterinary school and was overwhelmed with learning about anatomy, physiology, medicine, surgery, all the diagnostics, all the imaging, I kind of put those childhood dreams to the side and really focused on being a good veterinarian, being the best veterinarian I could be, and really relishing that experience. But then I met someone early in my veterinary career, Dr. Bran Ritchie, who was one of my professors at the University of Georgia. And he is now an avian virologist. At the time, I believe he was working on his PhD, and he was studying cytosine beak and feather disease and needed someone to help him care for the parrots that were and cockatoos that were impacted by this infection. And so I had volunteered to help and got to know him and got to work with parrots early as a veterinary student. And I was just amazed by parrots, by their intelligence, by just how unique they were compared to the dogs and cats that I was used to working with. And also at the University of Georgia, we had a small area where we would take in injured raptors, hawks and mm-hmm. eagles, owls, usually that were hit by cars. And Dr. Ritchie would see these as patients, and I would help him along with some other members of my class to take care of those animals, especially on the weekends, feeding, cleaning, things like that. So I started to get exposed to animals other than dogs and cats in vet school. And once I graduated, I guess I'm skipping, huge amounts of information, of course. But when I was in high school, I worked for a small animal veterinarian, and I loved it. And I worked all through high school. I worked quite a bit through college. I even continued to work for veterinarians when I was in vet school. And then I must say, by the time I got close to graduating from veterinary school, working for a veterinarian or being a veterinarian and working in a clinic kind of lost some of its magic for me. I really started going back to those childhood dreams of wanting to make a difference in the world. Now, it could have been my age, I was in my late 20s at that point, and you want to make a difference. You want to leave your mark on the world. And so I started talking with Dr. Ritchie about different possibilities and different career paths. And this was not like it is today. There was not a straightforward career path to what I wanted to do, but there was an opportunity I had a friend of mine, he had graduated vet school the year before I did, was working as an intern at the Toledo Zoo. And so I went and spent a couple weeks at the Toledo Zoo after I graduated and learned a little bit about zoos. And growing up, I was not a zoophile. I didn't go to zoos often. I think I grew up in the Atlanta area, only went to the Atlanta Zoo once, I believe, when, my whole time living there, and was never impressed by the concept of zoos. And that was until I went to the Toledo Zoo, and until I really understood that I didn't really know what zoos did. I only saw zoos on the surface, what I saw, as a visitor walking around, and I didn't really understand the amount of care that went into the animals, taking care of the animals, the science behind it, and really what was really new to me was zoos' role in conservation.
Yep.
And so I think this was in 1990, so quite a while ago, I started learning about zoos' role in conservation, and I thought, hey, maybe this is for me. Maybe this is something I can do. And well, as luck would have it, there was an opportunity. I believe there are only 2 opportunities available in the United States at that point in time, and one of them was an internship in zoo and exotic animal medicine at the University of Tennessee in the Knoxville Zoo. And so I applied, and I went there for a year, and I had an incredible experience that led to my residency at UC Davis in zoo medicine. And there I met Dr. Murray Fowler. Dr. Fowler, many of people might know, maybe not, is really considered the father of zoo medicine. He's the idol for all of us. He was an incredible man. Just a I can't even think of the word. He was just a pioneer in this field, did so many things for the first time ever. And I learned a lot from him, and I was fortunate to be one of the last residents that he ever trained. So that got me started in my career. I went on to work at Riverbanks Zoo in South Carolina. And, being a zoo veterinarian is really, really exciting. Everything's a first, at least it was for me at that time. And it's very much problem solving. It's, you're faced with basically a black box or brown box or gray box or a striped box with fur, scales or feathers, and you have to try to figure out what's happening inside. And that was fascinating to me, just that problem solving. And there's not standardized equipment that you could buy off the shelf for elephants. So there's a lot of innovation that occurs also in the profession. So I did that for 7 years, but I really, I kept kind of in the back of my mind, kept thinking, where am I going to leave my mark? How am I going to contribute to the world? What am I going to really do with all this education and training? And not just the education and training, but the passion that I had. Where was it all going to go? I needed an outlet. I needed more. And so when I was doing my residency at UC Davis, I worked with thick-billed parrots. And I was introduced to this species for the first time at the Sacramento Zoo. And these are one of the last parrot species ever to call the U.S. home. They were extirpated from southeastern Arizona, southwestern New Mexico in the 1930s. And other than the Carolina parakeet, those were the only 2 parrot species ever to live in the U.S. And when I learned more about the parrot, I couldn't believe that we would allow the species to be extinct essentially from the U.S. And I wanted to learn more about the parrot's natural history and what happened and what was going on in the field. And I was fortunate at the Sacramento Zoo. We had a very large colony of thick-billed parrots and a couple of people who were really, really passionate about thick-billed parrots and were really good at breeding parrots. And then through the American Association of Zoos and Aquariums and the thick-billed parrot species survival plan, I was able to learn about opportunities in northern Mexico where folks were studying thick-billed parrots. And so the SSPs, for those folks that don't know, are called species survival plans. These are basically a strategic approach to managing all individuals of a species that are in AZA zoos collectively. So if a zoo has anywhere from 2 to 10 thick-billed parrots, there may be 200 in the country. And so they're managed as a single population, and they're managed for their genetics, but also managed to learn about their nutrition and their disease. So what's really cool, well, there's so many cool things about thickbills, but some of the cooler things are that they almost exclusively feed on pine cones and pine seeds. So they have a very specific diet. And they also live in high elevation pine forests in northern Mexico. And we're talking about, elevations of 8 to 10,000 feet. So this is, parrots, we generally think of parrots in more tropical regions where it's warm, but here they are building nests in an area that gets considerable snowfall each year. So anyway, I'm going all the way around here, but so I started working with the thick-billed parrots. I became the veterinary advisor for this species for the SSP. So I got to learn a lot about thick-bills. And then when I heard about opportunities to work with biologists in the field, I really grabbed onto that opportunity. Well, what I found out is, really, veterinarians aren't always welcome in certain circles because they're oftentimes associated with disease. So I tried to get myself invited to this thick-billed parrot conservation meeting that was being held in Arizona. And I was like, I'm Nadine Lamberski. I'm the veterinary advisor for thick-billed parrots. I'd love to attend your meeting and talk to you about parrot diseases, and it was basically, we don't, we're not really concerned about parrot diseases. These parrots don't have diseases. We don't want you to find any diseases. That's really not what we need right now. And I said, well, perhaps I misrepresented myself. And trying to think on my feet here, I said, well, really, my job is to protect the health of the thick-billed parrots and to assure that they're healthy so that, if we were to consider translocating parrots from Mexico into the U.S. or releasing parrots from the U.S. back into Mexico, you'd have to do you need some assurance of their health. So I kind of sort of backdoored my way into this meeting. Anyway, I got invited to the meeting, really developed a really strong rapport with the folks that were working with thick-billed parrots in northern Mexico. And then over the years, had visited the field site and initiated some projects with the field team. Probably started for 15, 20 or so years, maybe more than that. And it was that's when my eyes really opened to what a veterinarian could do in conservation, and not just any veterinarian, but me, right? I was trying to figure out where's my door? How do I find that entryway? And I had a lot of friends at the time that were doing working with rhinos in Africa or elephants or lions and all these, really charismatic megavertebrates. And I thought, hey, you know what? There's a lot of competition in those areas, but there are phenomenal animals that are, just this big. And that was where I kind of gravitated towards those species. And it reminded me that, I was a zoo veterinarian. I had a skill set. My first priority was the animals and the care at the zoo. But because I had so much energy and passion, I really created outlets for myself to get involved in conservation programs. So from there, I also at the Sacramento Zoo, I worked with another species of cat, black-footed cat. And it is the smallest cat in Southern Africa, I think in all of Africa. Really tiny, smaller than a house cat, has big ears, short legs, big head, short tail. It looks kind of like a tabby, but behaves quite a bit differently. It's quite an aggressive cat. Anyway, solitary, nocturnal, lives in some of the harshest climates in South Africa. And I worked with them at the Sacramento Zoo. And what was surprising to me is that they were succumbing at a very early age to a kidney disease. And I was, getting really eager to make a difference in the world and wanted to find out more about why these cats were dying at young age. And in fact, I did a compilation of some information from zoos, and at one point in time, 85% of black-footed cats between the ages of 3 and 5 years would die from kidney failure. And that's not sustainable, right? Those are prime breeding years, and if the cats are dying, then that population isn't going to survive. So I really wanted to find out why, and I through connections through the zoos, I met a man named Alex Sliwa, who is worked at a Wuppertal Zoo in Germany, now is at the Cologne Zoo, and the curator. And he was studying for his PhD thesis, was studying aardwolves in South Africa. And then while he was studying aardwolves, he noticed these black-footed cats running around, and they, of course, were far more interesting than aardwolves. So after his PhD, he started studying them, and then years went by, and I eventually had an opportunity with another colleague of mine, Jason Herrick, to go to South Africa with Alex to capture black-footed cats and get some blood samples and other biological samples, and try to learn more about their natural history, what they ate, what pathogens they carried, to help us understand how to care for them better in zoos. So that's kind of how all that connects back. And anyway, I'll maybe I should stop there because I could just keep going on and on. But that was another project that, again, kind of opened my eyes into different opportunities. And then after Riverbanks, I was recruited out to San Diego, and came out here to work with a different group of animals I had not worked a lot with, mostly hoofstock, but we also had black-footed cats and thick-billed parrots. So I had my favorite species also to work with, and I had other opportunities here as well to really fulfill that that dream I had as a child of working with endangered species, both of which black-footed cats and thick-billed parrots are considered endangered. And then as my career progressed, I would say that my dream of saving endangered species, I'm probably closer to that now than I've ever been throughout my career. So it feels like I've gone full circle almost.
That's awesome. No, that's really awesome. As you know, Nadine, as you're telling that story, I'm thinking I spent some time, going through the peer-reviewed literature that you put out there over the last many years, and I just, I was walking through it. I found it so fascinating because, early on, aside from the thick-billed parrots and the black-footed cat, you're taking care of allergic rhinitis in chimpanzees. There was an article about a giraffe that had a colonic obstruction. There was this other cat in Africa that was bitten by a rattlesnake. You had to take care of that. And so it's really a fascinating walk. And then come to the sort of recent months, you published this really interesting paper in Frontiers in Veterinary Science, June of last year, and it's entitled "Utilizing a Theory of Change for Better Health Outcomes." And here you talk about the fact, okay, we have this term health outcomes. We see it all over the place in human healthcare literature, not so much in the veterinarian literature, and not at all in the zoologic literature. But you tie it back to this important, as you were saying, important component of improving health, leading or having this important connection to wildlife conservation. Talk about this paper, if you would. I think it's kind of important.
Well, it's just an editorial, so it's not a full manuscript, but it was I'd say almost a product of the pandemic in many ways, and an evolution of my own train of thought in this space. So, like I said, I've been in the zoo wildlife field for a long time, over 30 years now, and very proud of the work I've done and being a veterinarian and the contributions veterinarians make. But as over the past few years, as I moved into a new role and I started working almost full time in the conservation space, learning about conservation language and methods, and how does one really do conservation? And I realized, wait a second, we're missing something as veterinarians. We could be more strategic in our approaches to medical care, and similarly to human medicine. But I guess I want to say, first off, I don't want to parallel human medicine, because a lot of that is driven by money. You don't want to get the best outcome for the least cost, because that drives the healthcare costs down. That makes perfect sense. But in our profession, it's a little bit different. The driver is that better health outcome. And I think you could ask any zoo veterinarian, we'll pay for that. We'll pay extra to get that better outcome. And what I mean by this is, a lot of times veterinarians are reactionary. Animal comes in, we do our best, we fix it, goes back out, we hope it does well. There are a lot of things we do that we consider preventive medicine: vaccinations, routine health checks, dental prophylaxis, different things that are supposed to be upstream to reacting to a veterinary, to an illness or to a surgical emergency. But I'm really struck by this idea of measuring what matters. And if we really want to have a better health outcome, don't we have to know what we're trying to achieve? And it's of course, everyone will say, we say it in our own practice, we're doing a better job today than we did 10 years ago. And that's because we have more diagnostics. We can make diagnoses faster, better, which means we can initiate treatment earlier. But are we really thinking about the whole life of that animal? And is it really better? And one of the challenges in zoo medicine is thinking about that whole life experience of an animal. And, we can do just about anything. I mean, we are a very highly trained profession. And the question that I think we all eventually ask ourselves is, we can do almost anything on any animal to try to help it. The question is, should we? What kind of life is that animal going to have after that intervention? And is that really a better health outcome? Are we looking at the immediate health outcome? Are we looking at surgical survival? That's one measure, right? But what about integrating that animal back into its social group? What about that animal being able to navigate its habitat that contains mountains, or maybe it has to climb trees, and maybe it was left impaired because of the surgery. Maybe the surgery is going to impair its ability to breed. And so it's really trying to challenge veterinarians to think about the outcome that they're going for. Is it post-surgical survival? Is it integration into the social group? Is it release into the wild? And that's a continuum. And you really have to think about that ultimate health outcome that you want for that animal, so that you design your interventions appropriately. And then you have to measure those and hold yourself accountable. Now, the zoo veterinary community isn't quite ready to measure these outcomes. And that was the point of the editorial. Yep. We are on the cusp. We have now what's called ZIM, Zoological Information Management System, and it has a medical records component that hundreds of zoos around the world are utilizing. It's a centralized database. And because we have this centralized database, we have the ability to use our own data. And so this editorial was supposed to be an encouragement to start using the data that we're generating to drive better health outcomes. But let's ask the right questions. Okay. One question is surviving surgery. The other question is that animal well-being and wellness component of what kind of life is that animal going to have as a result of our interventions, and is that in the best interest of the animal? Can we do better for that individual animal?
Excellent. In 2018, you published a paper that was entitled Animal Welfare in Conservation Breeding Applications and Challenges. And here you talk about sort of this balance that you and your team need to strike in terms of, we have to have important animal welfare. At the same time, there's effects of captivity. And speaking out of turn here, I'll let you talk about this, that you have to keep in mind at the same point. a couple of years ago, I had Professor Hildebrandt on the show from over in Germany talking about inseminating the last of the northern white rhinoceroses. Talk a little bit about this paper, if you would, and a little bit of what, I don't know, obviously there's as I mentioned at the beginning, you're I don't know if I neglected to mention, but you're also part of the International Union for Conservation of Nature. And I'd love to hear just about sort of how in sort of your day-to-day you go about sort of deciding, okay, the black-footed cat, no, the whatever X species, yes, we have to focus on a little more breeding here. How do you balance, like, how does all that happen? Sort of take us a little through sort of the decisions in terms of some of the conservation breeding initiatives.
Mm-hmm. Well, that question was about rambled as some of my comments in terms of trying to pull a lot of stuff together. So
let's talk about breeding.
Well, I'm going to talk about that manuscript first on animal welfare, because I think it's really important. And I want to congratulate and acknowledge my colleagues who wrote it. I was just one of many who were on that paper. But really, what it's talking about are the opportunities to thrive, and that's how we assess animal wellness in zoos and aquarium, by using these 5 opportunities to thrive. These opportunities to thrive are based out of the original 5 freedoms. If you're aware of any of the original talk about the use of animals for food, there was a movement in the 60s to guarantee the 5 freedoms, like the ability to stand and have food, or actually they were freedoms from harm. So it would be freedom from not having food, or freedom from not having shelter. Well, our organization, San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance, took those 5 freedoms and reversed them into 5 opportunities to thrive. So they're the 5 positive things, and they're our 5 freedoms, or our opportunities to thrive, are a strategically presented, well-balanced diet, the opportunity to self-maintain, opportunity for optimal health, expressions of species typical behavior, and choice and control. So when we look at an animal's life, whether it's in human care or living on its own in nature, that's a continuum, and these opportunities to thrive are woven in there. And when an animal's under managed care or in human care, we want to make sure that we preserve those opportunities. And one of my favorites is that opportunity to show species-specific behavior. So that's why a lot of times in zoos will hide food for an animal, or present food at different times of the day in different ways, so that the animal has to forage or hunt and do those behaviors that they were born to do. Mm-hmm. And one of my favorite behaviors, or favorite concepts really, is that idea of luxury behaviors. And a luxury behavior is a behavior that an animal will only do when it's well fed and it feels safe. And that luxury behavior is play. And so when I see animals playing now, I look at my own silly cat. When I see him playing, to me it means so much more now. It means, wow, you've got everything you need, and now you're just playing because life is that good for you. And that's what I love in zoos. I think as visitors, when you see animals playing, you must realize they are showing you they are living their best life. They've got everything they need, and they feel so safe and relaxed that all they could do is roll on their backs or a play fight with their companion or whatever. So it's really important. And what we're trying to show through this paper is that we have 2 endangered bird breeding facilities in Hawaii, and we work with both the alala and then Hawaiian forest birds, which are tiny honey creepers. And as we try to provide for them and meet their opportunities to thrive and prepare them for release into nature, which sometimes nature is pretty harsh, right?
Right.
That we have to acknowledge that there's this tension between the two, and sometimes your best intentions are to prepare animals for some of the obstacles that they're going to see in the wild, and we have to do things like aversion training, so that an alala, which is the Hawaiian crow, knows how to avoid predators. So it knows that Io, the Hawaiian hawk, is one of its predators. Unless we teach them that silhouette is bad, they may not instinctively remember that's something to be afraid of. So we try to create these opportunities, not just to thrive, but also to build that skill set that's going to be needed once they're released back into nature. And again, it's this continuum of care. You mentioned the IUCN. IUCN is International Union for Conservation of Nature, and it's a global member organization of conservationists, and many zoos are members of IUCN, as well as many governments and non-governmental agencies. And it really helps to centralize what needs to be done to save nature.
Mm-hmm.
And right now in this, in light of the pandemic and biodiversity crisis, climate change, climate crisis, and all the socioeconomic injustices, there's this convergence and this urgency of all these needs that go back to really restoring nature and recovering nature, because we've treated it so badly in our human history that we're now starting to feel those repercussions. That's how pandemics happen. That is a disturbed environment that creates the conditions for spillovers to occur, where pathogens go from one species to another, when they're really in nature, they're not supposed to come in contact with each other. But it's because these habitats are disturbed, because there's roads, because there's illegal wildlife trade, because there's consumption of wild animals. Again, there are things that aren't supposed to happen that happen now. So again, the IUCN, working with the Center for Biological Diversity, has created targets and goals for organizations all to work towards together. And it goes back to, think globally, act locally. And every little action that we do as a zoo, every conservation action, many are very, very local, but they're additive, and they're all additive and leading up to these global goals, which I find brings me closest to that childhood dream of saving endangered species, because it's not like I thought when I was younger, right? It's not like I'm going to individually take this this endangered flamingo and nurse it back to health and release it. I'm contributing to global goals, and these goals not only help nature, they really help people and communities that live closest with nature. Yep. And they're the folks that really that really need to be empowered and have the resources to take care of nature, because we all benefit from the ecosystem services that we gain from healthy ecosystems. But if the communities that are living closest to nature are marginalized and not benefiting from conservation, then then why should they protect nature? So I think the IUCN has really helped, for me at least, to package all those thoughts and to organize them and create those goals and targets that organizations like mine can attach onto and contribute to, and be part of this global movement to protect and restore nature, and of course biodiversity being what nature is made up of. So did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it was an awesome answer, and you segue very nicely into this next one, because you mentioned the spillover events, and in the bio I mentioned that you, in addition to everything else that you do, you're also an adjunct professor at UC Davis and in the One Health Institute, and John Mazette was on the show about 18 months ago or so, talking about the Virome project. I saw some, really interesting articles about some gorillas at the zoo that had COVID, and you've been involved in immunizing them. And I just love to, if you could sort of talk a little bit more about, once again, sort of the conservationist role here in, as you were saying, this at the border here between humans and wildlife, and sort of, here we have. We don't think about things spilling from animal to human. Here we have human to animal. Talk a little bit about what's going on in terms of sort of the vaccination process, but also the more global sort of zoonotic issues that you have to contend with in your day-to-day work.
Yeah, so you're taking me back to January 2021, and that was, of course, that's when COVID had that resurgence. And I believe it was just pre-Delta variant, I believe. And there was a lot of, in San Diego, where I live, there was a lot of community acquired infections. And as we had, what we'd been fearing is that as the infections rise in the community, the animals in our care are part of our community, and they acquired COVID despite all of our precautions. And that was, it was a really strange time, right? Because it was, you just don't want to be the first zoo that had COVID in their gorillas. There were several after us, but it wasn't something we were really striving for, right? Because we saw it, we thought our protocols were good, and the reality is, as good as they were, we still, our animals still got COVID. Technically, we should sort of talk about the virus SARS-CoV-2, and we were able to, because of our talented veterinary team, manage those animals through that disease process. And through relationships, kind of in a circuitous route, I had met someone from Zoetis, the veterinary vaccine maker, actually. Prior to our gorillas getting COVID, we were talking about the possibility of vaccinating. And at the time I was interested, but there was no urgency. It was right before the holidays. So we're like, yes, we'll talk more next year. And then, of course, like as soon as it happened with the COVIDs, with our gorillas, he was the first person I called. And Zoetis was fantastic in mobilizing the vaccine. Now, we didn't vaccinate the sick gorillas. We managed them differently, but we had other apes and other gorillas. We have two facilities, San Diego Zoo, Safari Park, San Diego Zoo. The Safari Park gorillas were the ones that contracted COVID. The zoo gorillas had not, but now that we know they're susceptible, we wanted to do everything, within our power to protect them. And so we protected our gorillas, orangutans, and bonobos with the vaccine. And then Zoetis, being such a forward-thinking and socially responsible company, really wanted to share the vaccine with other zoos, made vaccines available for free to zoos throughout the country, and I believe even outside of the U.S. So they've been great, and they really added that little peace of mind. I think we all know where vaccines went. They're not the panacea that maybe we thought they could be at first, but they certainly helped. We haven't had any mortality. Several months after our gorillas, some tigers developed Delta variant of COVID and were also very sick, but recovered. And I really credit, the care of our veterinary team, our wildlife care specialists. And of course, some of those animals were vaccinated, not all of them at that time. We think the vaccine also helped. But kind of going back to how does this fit into conservation? What was, if you could just imagine being the first zoo in the world to have COVID in their gorillas, dealing with that, dealing with a geriatric silverback that had pre-existing heart disease and thinking about what could happen to him. That was very stressful.
Sure.
Dealing with the media, dealing with the questions of our own team, trying to protect our team from getting COVID from the gorillas, right? So we know they got COVID, most likely, from a person, but now they could also give it back. So we couldn't prevent it one way. How are we going to prevent it this way? So there's like it was a mind-blowing time. Mm-hmm. Well, on top of that, we have a lot of colleagues that are working with gorillas in Africa, and particularly with the mountain gorillas, where they're tourists. And of course, during COVID, the tourism stopped. So there weren't tourists that were near gorillas, but there were still guards that were watching the gorillas and getting close. And so we were able to have conversations with both folks working with gorillas and orangutans in the wild to help refine the biosecurity measures and the personal protective equipment that's worn and the protocols that were worn to try to learn from each other and share best practices. And so that was a really interesting way that our zoo gorillas and gorillas in the wild really helped each other out. We're able to I felt like we're able to contribute to protecting gorillas in the wild by sharing something as mundane as a protocol and being part of that community where we, number one, we do share information very freely, and we just want to help. And we all want to work together and collaborate. So that was a really, really great experience from that perspective.
While we're on the topic of gorillas, in the March 2022 edition of the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance Journal, there's this piece discovering the biodiversity of the African forest. And in this article is a little blurb on a shrub known as Aphromomum melagueta, also known as grains of paradise. And strangely enough, in a past career, I was involved in a grains of paradise project that linked to the captive Westland gorilla and the pole fibrosing cardiomyopathy story. Could you say a couple words about sort of, as you're breeding, going through all the very interesting things that you do about how you get some of these species ready to go back into in the wild. There is this wild, pharmacy out there as well. We refer to as zoo pharmacognosy or so forth. Any interesting stories about how ultimately, you teach an animal that you're reintroducing about, nature's medicine chest, and other interesting stories like the Aphromomum story?
Well, actually, I want to ask you more about what you did with that.
It's a long
plant.
story.
We've got time. I kind of thinking back, one of the things we really tried to do, or we're really trying to do more of now in zoos, is feed animals their natural diets, which is not easy, right? Because there's sourcing issues. There's a grape that you buy in the grocery store is not the same as a wild fruit. They're quite different nutritionally, but we do try, and we especially feed a lot of browse. We try to use some native species or closely related species, but the example I can give that I think I'm probably closest to know most about, I don't know much about that plant in African forest, sorry about that, it is working with parasites in hoofstock. Okay. And we use a lot of different browse, acacia being one that tend to be high in tannins, and one thought is that changes the pH of the stomach and helps to make the environment unfriendly for parasites. Over the years, there's a type of hay, Serratia, that's also supposed to change the pH of the forestomach, and that would also be unfriendly for parasites and ruminants. It's a very common problem for us, and we try to grow it in our own soils and wasn't very successful. But so I'm just acknowledging that we do try to use medicinal plants if we know of them. But when we release animals back into the wild, I'm not aware that we have all the knowledge that we could have about the medicinal use of these plants. I think we really want to tap onto the animal behaviorists that study animals in the wild and think about what they're eating and why. There's really calculated reasons why they're eating something. One, it might just be availability, but two, it might be I feel nauseous today, or I have a headache, or there has to be some solutions out there.
Sure.
I don't know if you're familiar with Mark Plotkin, ethnobotanist, and I've met him a couple of times throughout my career, and I've always just been fascinated by the potential there. And I know there's a few zoos that have I don't know if you'd call them a healing garden or medicinal garden, but I've also kind of had this secret dream of having a medicinal garden in some of our larger field habitats here, where every season we could open it up and let the animals choose what medicines they want, and then close it back up so the plants can recover. But I have a lot of dreams, and that one hasn't risen to the top yet. But hopefully that can inspire someone else to focus on that, because it would be really great to go back to nature and in all aspects of how we manage wildlife in human care, and add these components to their life, because it will better prepare them for if they are released into nature. And that does remind me of one thing I meant to say with IUCN when I was talking about that continuum of animals in managed care to living in nature without any human involvement. And that's called a one plan approach by IUCN. And historically, there was always this divergence. You're either captive or you're wild. But really what we'd like to say now is it's a continuum of either human care or without human care in nature. But as our world changes, and as habitats fragmented, and as fences are put up, particularly all over Africa, large herbivores and other megavertebrates they can't travel like they want to. And so these populations have to be managed, because there's carrying capacity in those spaces. There's resources like food and water that are only enough to serve a certain number of animals. If those animals can't freely move out of those areas, then their quality of life's going to suffer. So again, we like to encourage people to think about this continuum, and not this hard stop between captive and wild.
That makes sense. And what is coming up for 2023 per the Zoo Wildlife Alliance? Any upcoming field work that we should know about, conferences that you're going to be presenting at, other initiatives that I did not touch on? Please have the floor.
Oh, there's a ton of things. I would say that what I'd love to share is that over the past couple of years, we've focused our very, very expansive conservation activities into 8 ecoregions around the world. So we have 8 conservation hubs, and within each of those hubs, we have multiple projects involving multiple species. But aside from that, we also are really trying to involve local communities, and also trying to partner with organizations that are looking out for the landscape and trying to protect and restore the landscape. And so to me, this is that holistic One Health approach. Yep. It's really focusing on that interconnectedness of the health of people, wildlife, and the environment. And of course, that's related to the health of our planet. And so where we traditionally as an organization have been very species focused, we're still species focused. That's our expertise, but we also need to look at the bigger picture and bring in partners, but specifically work very, very closely with local communities and build that capacity so that so that everyone can benefit from conservation.
Sure.
So some of the activities that I personally am involved with are quite you might consider them a little bit boring right now in my career. I find them sort of almost more exciting in a lot of ways, because it's about framing our conservation work and creating a way to plan, manage, monitor, and communicate the impact of our work.
Yep.
And the framework that we're using now is conservation standards. It's a globally adopted framework for conservation that is really helping us to maybe equalize might be the wrong word, but standardize our approach to conservation across all of our hubs, and really be able to look at the hold ourselves accountable for the goals that we're trying to achieve by creating metrics, and then also being able to pull all those metrics together and communicate the impact that our organization is trying to have towards these global initiatives. So isn't that exciting?
It is exciting. I mean, no, I mean, it's, I really, as I said, I enjoyed reading all about you to get ready for the show, but, listening to sort of the diversity of what you're involved in and the things that you have to think about, on a daily basis. I really enjoyed it, Nadine, and I really wish you and your team with what you're doing the best as you move all these efforts forward, because as I said in the bio, your goal is safeguarding biodiversity, conservation efforts to make sure all life can thrive on this planet, and I think that's an extremely important goal. So I'm glad you're there doing it. Again, for everybody that is going to be listening to this particular episode of our show across the various podcast networks or watching on the YouTube channel. Again, you've been listening to Dr. Nadine Lamberski, Chief Conservation and Wildlife Health Officer, San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance. Nadine, I really enjoyed our conversation. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come talk to us for a little while about all these topics. And obviously thank you for the biosphere for doing them. And as we like to say on our show here, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow for all of us and all the species out there for what you're doing. It really, really is a great story.
Well, thank you, Ira. And I really appreciate the opportunity to share my story and hopefully share a little bit about San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance.
It was awesome. Good seeing you.
All right, you too.